Welcome to today's webinar called Think Better Than a Fraudster: How to Use AI to Tackle Financial Crimes. This webinar is brought to you by Express Computer in partnership with IBM. I am Govind Chaudhary, correspondent with Express Computer. With the rise in digital activities, fraudsters around the world are on the lookout for exploiting opportunities to target vulnerable people and institutions. The environment created by the COVID-19 has created a perfect storm for fraud risk. The fraud triangle, a framework commonly used to explain the motivation behind committing fraud, outlines three components that contribute to increasing the risk of fraud: opportunity, incentive, and rationalization. In this uncharted climate, it is difficult to anticipate the exact nature and the extent of impending fraudulent threats and business challenges. But the ability to rapidly identify new threats and implement adaptive fraud prevention controls and take corrective action will be critical for business operational continuity. So before we kickstart, I will read out the webinar information. This webinar is being broadcasted live and will be available as on demand. This is an audio-visual webinar. We will have poll questions in between. I request all to participate in the same. We will have a round of question and answers at the end of the session. You can send in your questions using the Q&A text box and we will address the same based on time after the presentation. If you also face any technical issues, please use the Q&A text box to send in your issue and we will try to sort out the same to the best of our abilities. If any of your questions are unanswered, we will connect with you over email to answer the same. Also, a feedback form will open in your browser after the webinar ends. Please fill in the form. We would love to hear from you as your feedback is valuable to us. To know more, we have with us our esteemed speakers, Mr. Pradeep Iyer and Mr. Atul Joshi. Mr. Iyer is a segment leader, Watson AI, from IBM India South Asia region. With over 18 years of experience across industries, he has been instrumental in helping enterprises unlocking value from data. In his role as an offering leader, his current focus is to identify and build AI journeys for customers that can transform volumes of data into cognitive intelligence. As a data and AI evangelist, he has helped several organizations to accelerate business transformation with adoption of AI. And Mr. Atul Joshi is the Chief Technical Architect at IBM from South Asia region. With an experience of over 17 years, Atul is a part of IBM Data and AI team with focus on business analytics and regulatory technology solutions. He has been instrumental in technically driving the IBM's business analytics value proposition across the customers. His core expertise is around envisaging the performance management led solutions covering a broad spectrum of strategic and financial planning, management, and financial reporting and regulatory technology, strengthened by the predictive and prescriptive analysis. Over to you, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks, Govind. A very good afternoon to all of you. It's been a delight to have all of you come together. And as the app title says, that we got to think better than a fraudster. Only then we'll be able to curb the challenges that our society is facing. And last 18 months for all of us has been a very different, unique experience. And we all know that financial crimes have been on the rise for a very, very long time. And as we know that we've been facing these challenges because of various reasons. Some of the social engineering fraud that we come across is pretty common that we see in our country as well. And the good news is that we have so many intelligent people who are putting together the solution strategy for IBM. And it's been an experience across geography, because a fraudster doesn't really look at the geography. He looks at the money and the ways to siphon away the money. And this has been a learning for us in the last few quarters as to how we can do this in a way which is efficient. And one of the good things about IBM is that we recently got into bringing a lot of artificial intelligence into our solutions, and which is something Atul is going to share over the next few minutes. And I'm sure it's going to be helpful to all of you. because many of the organizations have had investments in fraud detection solution. But the point is, do these fraud detection solutions really help an organization when the need is? The answer is definitely you know better, whether you had an experience in recent times. What we're going to do in the next few minutes is share our experience, our knowledge, and try to see if it can be beneficial in your pursuit together, collaboratively, bringing down financial crimes in the society.
Hey, thanks, Pradeep, and thanks everybody for joining with us today. To begin with, the way I see this is most of you are, already using some sort of solution around preventing these payment frauds, right? And if you look at the typical flavors, you could have something like an authentication tool. When people actually log into your internet application, mobile application, they use their user ID, password, OTP, and stuff like that, and then they start accessing the solution. So that's like the first, firewall that you have. And then once they are into your sort of area, we've seen that people are using multiple solutions where you have, let's say, pre-built AI models which will detect anomalies and different patterns and try to identify if there is a case which can be identified as a fraud. Or you could have some solutions where based on the fraud investigators practical experience, they could be looking at certain rules which are already configured. Some simple rules like the transaction happening during late nights, certain amounts of transaction, certain types of transaction, which is really simple to understand, but that sort of is there in terms of some rudimentary and analytics around that. And the third is more of a post-mortem, where you combine the payment data as well as the non-financial customer profile and all those different angles that you would want to look at your transaction from, right? So in bits and pieces, these things would be there. However, ideally, if you see that none of this as a standalone approach makes a meaningful impact, and that actually results into a scenario where probably you are looking at taking the best of these two things. So you have on one side you have false positive rates. I'm sure many of you understand the terminology, but for somebody who doesn't, typically if you are saying a false positive rate is 1:3, that means if you identify one transaction as the fraudulent transaction, uh, probably you're also looking at hitting three transactions which are genuine but identified as fraud, and then hence tagged as fraud, and the customer experience is impacted. On the other hand, you look at the fraud detection rates, which would be very high if you have a higher, sort of false positive rate, and so on and so on and so forth. So it's really trade-off between the customer satisfaction and the amount of investment that you are doing here, right? So how do you kind of address this? So what we have done is we've tried to look at the pitfalls across all these approaches, and complement that with the robust capability that we have brought with IBM Safer Payment. So the first thing, the way it starts is you have your authentication tools. Obviously, no need to rip and replace anything. What one can do is, you can use the device fingerprinting, identity, biometrics, SDK, and use that metadata as further, enabler for, identifying those transactions, potentially being a fraud transaction. The second thing is around the entire democratization of the AI capabilities that we see. So we have our own sort of capability which is best in breed, as well as from a business user's point of view is easy to use. Uh, but we also adopt to some of the existing models that you may have. So it really brings in the best of both world, and really making it quite transparent in that whole process. The third thing is around rules driven. So we also understand that the investigators would actually like to use their own rules, simple to use UI for them to even write those rules and combine that with the power of technology. And the biggest impact is when we talk about combining the financial and non-financial data, and the result has to be there in terms of milliseconds, because we are not talking about a post-mortem fraud detection. This is a real-time fraud detection, thousands of transactions per second, which are being handled, and the detection has to happen in the milliseconds, sub 10 milliseconds kind of scenario. Now, if this is the case, while you wouldn't have really a whole load of data with respect to the, the transaction feeds that comes into the model, but when you have to calculate that along with the profile, the customer profile, the device profiles, or, you look at the calendar profiles, device fingerprinting and, identity SDK, etc., that really becomes a huge task. So we build a robust architecture that handles these kind of scenarios very well and gives you the best of the results, right? So with this brief overview, I'll be talking about a bit detail around that. I would request the team to start the couple of questions from the poll.
Sure, Mr. Joshi. It's time for the poll questions. I would request our audience to actively participate in the poll. So the first question is, are you using any real-time payment fraud detection currently? The options are yes and no. I'll repeat the question. Are you using any real-time payment fraud detection currently? Yes and no. We are waiting for the audience's response. 58% people are saying that so far they aren't using, and 42% people are using. We'll go for the next question. What payment channel you consider a priority to deploy a real-time payment fraud detection solution? I'll repeat the question. What payment channel you consider a priority to deploy a real-time payment fraud detection solution? The options are UPI and mobile. The second option is online. Third option is ATM. The fourth option is others. I'll repeat the options. The first option is UPI and mobile. The second option is online. Third option is ATM, and fourth is others. I'll once again request our audience to actively participate in the poll questions. We have got the results. 61% people believe that UPI and mobile, that's what they have chosen. 35% people have chosen the online. 2% people have opted ATM and others. Back to you, Mr. Joshi.
Thank you, team. Right, I think those poll question results were quite encouraging in terms of what people are looking at in terms of taking the advantage of these kind of technologies. So earlier I mentioned that to address these channels, what we have built is something that really goes to the granularity of the question, in terms of identifying what are the bottlenecks and addressing the same, in terms of different technological components we have introduced. So the first thing is everybody is talking about AI, ML, and people are talking about the evolving nature of that. I think every now and then, if you look at the different articles, people talk about the newer and newer neural net models and stuff like that, which comes into addressing a very specific questions. So the expectation here is to be more open, and that's what we've tried to do. While we have our own sort of AI capability, which really helps the business users, create a rule around that. But we are also open in terms of adopting to some of the open source model if the customer has. So, for example, you may have your Python based model that you want to leverage, because obviously a lot of things have gone into that. So we also integrate those models along with our own models, to make it more democratic and to really join this data science, revolution that we talk about. The second thing is in terms of to use these best of breed technology. Sometimes the time is a factor that you need to consider, and the expectation is also in terms of being agile. So what we have done is we have created a model factory which takes the best of these different models and create a rule for the business users in couple of ways. So one way is you look at creating those rules automatically in a way that business users understand. there is no black box. So when you actually drill down into the rule, you know that what are the parameters of the rule. For example, the not just the payment related aspect, but also profiles of the customer, the way the transaction had happened, the devices that have been used, and some of the as we say, some of the calculations that happen in real time. So what was the average of the last few transaction over a period of time, across which geographies, etc., etc. Now, to cater to these kind of real-time calculation, which really goes into bringing the confidence on those payment fraud detection rules, you also need a very robust mechanism. So what we have done is we have created this solution which is clustered. So at any given point of time, you have a built-in high availability resiliency, so that if one of the node fails, the other node automatically takes care of the rest of the things, and they are all working in tandem, in consistency with each other. And we sort of have seen that 99.999% availability for a scenario where you have tens and thousands of transactions per second, and these payment fraud which happen detect and it's no surprise that obviously a lot of you are actually using some of those solutions. So it may be possible that for some of the newer channels, like online and mobile, probably there are need where you need to look at this fraud protection in a completely different way of thinking. So what we sort of recommend is you can select, across any channel, and as you go along, understanding the benefits that are coming out of the solution, you can extend that to other channels, right? So it is available across the channels, and we have some of the large global customers who are using it for their cards, the real-time payment system, peer-to-peer payment system, online banking, mobile banking. Also, in some cases where you have the sort of offline transaction that needs to be looked at as well. But the real proof of pudding is in terms of leveraging the technology to do that real time fraud detection, right? Now, when we talk about how does this actually happen, it's quite well built within the solution itself. So in terms of ingesting that data, it can be across various standard transportation layer. You have HTTPS or MQ or Kafka, whatever, or in terms of ingesting those message format data. Typically any payment transaction would have a message format, and we abide by that. In case you have some custom format in terms of ingesting that data, that is also taken care of. And finally, these days people talk about a lot of choices. Of course, payment fraud detection is something where people would want it as an on-premise solution, but we do have customers who are also using it on the cloud. So that's the kind of power we are talking about, because obviously compared to on-premise, cloud, the performance is slightly different if you want sub-millisecond detection of the fraud, right? This solution is really the cutting edge, in terms of empowering it with the performance that people expect, and we built it with the latest and greatest. And on top of that, we have some of the IBM technology platforms which are also enabled for these kind of solutions. So we are also integrating with that as well. So while you obviously work on an on-premise, it could also be on the IBM OpenShift Red Hat. If you look at some of the examples, we have the banks who are using it, across different channels. We have the switch operator, which really work across their client, national switch operators in various countries. Or it could be, the new age, startups as well, who are looking at identifying the fraudulent pattern. So it really doesn't matter who you are. If you are looking at the from a requirement perspective, if you are looking at the real-time fraud detection for those payments, that's the solution. This is the solution to go for it. One of the things that I talked about is, you would you would really have those logics and rule, right? But the key aspect here is how do you combine various things. So one is your payment related data, which probably comes at a lot of speed, but it's not great in terms of the variability of the data. You would obviously need to look at it from a different lens, different angles, and that's where we kind of combine that with the profiling. So the profile could be the customer profile, the profile could be related to the way the transactions are happening, and all of this happens in a real time. So that's the kind of power we talked about. And at the towards the end, whenever we talk about the security aspect, because these are really mission critical applications, one has to get it certified across the industry standards. So we have it certified with PCI PADSS certification, and it's always renewed as per the mandate. So you can rest assured about the data privacy, data security, even with the standards in terms of how the development of this application happens, etc. So this is really one of the gold industry standard, as you can see. Finally, to summarize, this 3 by 3 metrics, if you look at, the real power comes when you use the technology, but not in a way that it's a kind of closed black box approach. We really empower the key business user within the organization, who could actually look at the rules, how it's configured, what is the rationale behind it, and give that interpretation in a layman's, not really in terms of layman, the way the fraud investigator can understand, take into account various aspects of the payment transaction. The second thing is this has to be backed up by a really good architecture. So we have our robust in-memory NoSQL database, which is really optimized for these kind of workloads, and works at a greater accuracy with all the modeling capabilities that we have. And finally, despite being a cutting edge technology, it's not really that I would say geeky or technical. You could look at the benefits coming to you in a shorter time cycle, and as you go along, you could also expand in terms of covering more channels, or continuously looking at improving those rules. So it's not where you create those rules and then the rest assured. You actually work upon taking the entire production data into a sandbox, creating a simulation, and the investigation teams keeps on understanding from that data what could be the newer rules that can be defined. Because as typically these criminals are always one step ahead, and they try their creative ways. So how do you kind of uncover that with from your data using these technologies, what we look at, right? So with that, we have our next set of polls. So I would request the team to start the poll.
We'll have the next question for the poll. Which core banking solution do you use today? I'll repeat the question. Which core banking solution do you use today? The options are Finacle, FlexCube, and others. I'll repeat the options: Finacle, FlexCube, or others. I would request our audiences to participate in the poll. I would request our team to have the next question. Have you implemented an open source AI-based fraud detection tool in your organization? I'll repeat the question. Have you implemented an open source AI-based fraud detection tool in your organization? The options are yes, and the other option is no. We'll wait for the audience to reply. We have got the poll results. 73% people have replied with no, and the remaining 27 people have replied with yes. Back to you, sir.
Right, and some of the reasons that we've asked this is, when we actually go into the level 2 detail, which I'm sure, once we meet one-on-one basis, we'll ask a lot of questions, is how do you integrate with your existing infrastructure, whether it is in terms of your core banking solution or the payment solution, authorization solution, and so on and so forth. And the way we have seen is we build all the required tools to really make it work We have worked across multiple geographies, multiple clients, and plethora of various system in terms of whether it is a core banking solution, or payment solution, or authorization, and we were able to actually sort of prove our mental on in all those implementation. In fact, to the extent that a lot of places where we had actually seen some of the existing vendors who were just focusing on the some aspect of fraud monitoring, fraud detection, were actually kind of replaced once we implemented in one of the channels. The customers actually asked us to take it to the next channels as well. So we can integrate with all those existing applications you have, and really make it a seamless experience for you to improve the fraud detection, at the same time improving the false detection, false positive rate, etc. So with that, what I would do is I'll do a small demo of the product. Right. So what you see is the first, sort of dashboard where you have the real-time feeds coming up, whether it is in terms of, the system related aspect, the consumption of the hardware or CPU utilization, or if it is a fraud alert, number of authorizations and declines and stuff like that. Additionally, you could also see those in terms of your investigation across various class of queries, and look at it from a different time perspective, last hour, last day, week, or for a given period of time. So this really gives you a glimpse and in terms of what is happening, and then you go into the detail in terms of understanding what really is happening at the detail level. So here I have sort of details around the class. So you have the different payments, different transactions which are happening, and for each of these transactions, depending upon the output, whether it is identified as a fraud or not, and even when it is identified as a fraud, if it needs certain further consideration in terms of some more analytics around that, looking at it from a deeper perspective, it can actually create the different classes for the further investigation. So here an example where I'll just run the report, look at the summary, and see what different kind of patterns are arising out of it. Again, these are some of the names that is used. Shopping frenzy, typically the frauds have happened, and suddenly they've been spent in a very quick time. Or you have some of those defined countries where you see a concentrated a similar pattern across those frauds, and how these different cases have been handled by your team. So in terms of complete detail as to those case created, and the cases which are due for investigation, or what is the status of the closure, right? Similarly, if you look at the details around that, you can actually do a quick search. For example, in the parameter that you see, you have the entire list of your input from a payment data perspective, as well as the profile that you can search and see which of those things are actually part of your fraudulent transaction data, right? So here I've selected the a typical intercept code 1. Again, I mean, this is something that you define, but in my demo, you would have 0, which is the transaction is authorized, which is all genuine, no need to worry about it. If it is 1, then you refer it as a further investigation. If it is 2 and above, it could be a decline. Again, if it is 1, you might want to do a further check in terms of verifying that it gets transferred to a call center, and only after the confirmation the transaction goes through. This is something we have seen in some of the other countries, not sure if we follow it here. So for example, I take the first case, which is around this particular type of categories. And the way you work across this is this gives you a kind of workflow in terms of how the investigators work across it. So you can progress the case transition, put a memo, have your sort of comments, use the email alerts, etc., which needs to be gone to the right set of people. And then you also look at the detailed case data, look at the alarms that have been generated. Here you can see it's highlighted in the purple, and a complete detailing in terms of audit trail, when the case was actually identified, so you can see the case state as new, then it was transferred to one of the user, which is an investigator, and finally it was closed. You can add the case histories and attachment as the additional details, and it also tells you why this was actually identified as a fraud, and gives a list of rules that were triggered. In the next part of the demo, we'll see actually how these rules are configured. So currently it says this is a rule fired which considered a particular pattern, something like shopping frenzy and things like that. Now let's look at the model. How does it all work? So as you can see, the mandators here, this is nothing but your org hierarchy and multiple channels that you are going to use this solution for, right? So for example, in this case, this is Infinity Processing Corporation with multiple business units or subsidiaries it has, and across the various channel it is in terms of issue of card or acquiring business or mobile banking, internet banking, as the case may be. And down below what you see is the actual models that are running, which are identifying the fraudulent pattern. And the one which is in green says champion. This is the actual production model that is running. Now, one of the way that we have done is we have built the capability in the solution where we can actually take the live production data and use that to do a simulation, create new rules. So I can just simply go here and say, this is a live production data. For example, we can say copy, and then it creates a new challenger model. So you have the ability to entirely copy the production data and run, try to uncover new rules which you may not have configured yet. So it gives a really consistent view of identifying those rules, right? So let's select one of those champion models. As you can see here, the way the fraud detection works here is you will have the input parameters which are typically coming from your payment data, those transaction level details. Along with that, you will have a lot of profile data, not just in terms of your customer, but also the payment related profiles, or with respect to the calendar, the event that have happened. And we also have something called index and counters, which we'll show in a minute, right? So for example, if we look at some of these aspects and use let's say one of the model that we want to bring, taking into account all these different elements, you will have something called attributes, right? So all these attributes which are made up of your inputs and indexes and profiles are used. You can analyze those rules and look at how these things are really configured, right? So as you can see here, you will have these attributes which can work across the channels, right? So it's not just a siloed system where it takes into account a specific rule applicable to specific input or specific profile only applicable within a channel. But if needed, this can be used across the channel. And that's the reason on top you see the own and inherited attribute, right? So if you see a scenario where the ATM card is kind of stolen, and the same is used to withdraw the cash as well as use it in a shopping, then it will appear in the cards as well as ATM, both the scenarios, right? So that's where you can actually leverage different attributes from the individual channel as well as inherited channel. Now, one of the other thing that it does is, as I said, is the indexes. So these are the real-time calculation that will happen in split second. For example, the customer account number, card number, or some of those key identifier, where you need to calculate the values like such as what has happened with respect to this index in the last 24 hours or last 5 minutes, as we see in those social engineering fraud, where you get online requests to sell those cycles or vehicles, and somebody keeps sending the receive money request. So suddenly you see a pattern where in couple of minutes a new category of beneficiary is asking you a lot of money. That could be one of the use case here, right? So this really calculates based on the index all those parameters in real time, and that's the reason it is very important. Finally, if you look at it, how the rule works is the end result for this rule would be, either it would be an intercept code, which can be then shared with your, payment system to actually, block that transaction or, authorize that transaction, or even refer that transaction for the further investigation. So those, sort of end result or outputs are also something that you can define across various categories. right? So this is just a, really a sample around that. Right. Now, one of the things that we'll see here is the details about this profiling. As I said, we can actually take, the relevant details when the user actually logs in. And you may have these authentication tool, and we can work with those tools to take device related data, device fingerprinting, identity, biometrics. So that data can also be used here. The entire work, the heavy work in terms of using those parameters and doing the calculation for the meaningful fraud detection criteria is done within safer payment. So as you can see, you have the device identification, or you have the precedents that have happened with respect to that payment, or some of the details in terms of calendar related profiles or events, counter patterns, etc. Right. So here you have an example where you're looking at the daily profile in the last 4 days, how this has been used. So you can actually create those different types of profiles, and use those calculation which have been done in real time within your payment rules, right? Fraud detection rules. So what is the yesterday's frequency, what is the last 3 days frequency, and this can be a number of calculation that can happen, right? Or some critical scenarios, like this, when was the last time this card was used, last time this particular activities were done. So those could be unique event that will also go into the fraud detection, correct? Then some of the things that will happen. So this is just an example. For example, you can see here, the transactions that have happened in last 5 minutes, or you can combine the two things. For example, the amount and the time, and a certain type of category of payment or purchases and stuff like that, right? So you can see here the whole list of uh, inputs, the counters and attributes. These are really the building blocks which we will use to test the data, simulate, or even for the model generation, which creates a rule for this, right? So this was about setting up the things in terms of the initially identifying those building blocks. Now let's look at how do we actually automatically create the rule. So for that, earlier you had seen we had the production data, and we had created a lot of champion challenger models. So we'll use that challenger model for the simulation. And before I do that, I could also look at some of the existing indicators for my rules. For example, how many transaction I have hit for this whole existing scenario of the of this particular model. What is the health of this model, in terms of identifying the fraud transaction, genuine transaction, the fraud ratio. So all of this is created by the system automatically, right? If you look at the attribute analysis, for example, you can select an attribute like amount, and you can see in the graph, the red color is the fraudulent and blue is the genuine. You can see the fraudsters are actually liking the 500 to 1000, 1000 to 200 kind of buckets, uh, which means that you can now concentrate more on those specific bucket for building your rules, right? So that this gives you kind of those magnifying glass kind of scenario where you look at different profiles that you might be interested in. So here another case of the shopping related aspect. So as you can see, in most of those fraud cases, this shopping has happened at least for 2, 3, and 4. In fact, if it has happened for 4 times, then the probability of that become actually being a fraud is more, right? It also gives you some of the other scenarios where probably you are looking at those patterns, but they may not be actually fraud. So here you have some of the scenarios, a specific merchant country code, right? So if you had used this rule, there isn't much difference between the genuine or fraudulent transaction. So you may sort of ignore this may not be a meaningful thing used only in the from a standalone perspective. You could also see that some of these rules could be overlapping, right? And you have this rules overlap pattern that you could look at and see how you can sort of further optimize the rule. In fact, the solution also gives you the rule optimization sort of scenarios where the existing rule can be modified to improve the accuracy, or bring down the false ratio, etc. Right. So here you have an example around the false ratio, and the amount saved, and the genuine amount, across those different rules, right? And finally, you have a combined summary as to how these rules look like in terms of performance for the actual intercept that has happened, or the overall population of the rule as well, right? So what we will do is, now, with respect to the summary, we'll actually create some rules using the simulation that will run on the basis of the champion model that we had created, right? So what I'll do is, I'll go to the simulation. Now on top, you can see, you're having close to 2.4 million records. So this is again a demo, but a good lot of data that I've selected. And then I can do a further selection as to if only a chunk of data is used, or I can set up those conditions, etc. So let me start the simulation. It asks me, do you want to confirm running the simulation? And as you can see now, the simulation is running, and you can see the progress bar on top, which gives you the data that is available for you to now create the new rules. Now here we have a couple of options. One is, the built-in rules creation engine, or you can have, different other models as well. You can also bring in your own model. You have your open source model. You can convert that into your PMML format, and we can ingest that as well. So we can, sort of combine the score across the model and use it to make it more, accurate, if that's something you're looking at. While creating those rules, you can set your priority. What do you want in terms of your false positive? How many false positive that you would want to actually stop the rule generation process, or max number of condition and things like that. So you can actually really tweak it to, while it is an automated kind of scenario, you can also sort of customize this to suit your requirement, right? So as you can see, the rules have been started. Rules creation process has started, and the way it works is, it will initially create multiple conditions which you can take a look at, and those conditions can be clubbed to create a rule, right? So once this computation is over, you can see on top the status bar for the rule generation. Right now it is at 100, it has completed, I guess. Yes, and then it is highlighted in purple. So this is the first condition. For example, this condition talks about a region being identified, but if you look at the false positive, it's quite high, 11 false positive. So I might want to actually explore this condition along with the others. So when I click on that, it actually goes to the transaction level and says these were some of the transactions that were really relevant from the point of view of adding that as a condition, calculation of false positive and things like that. So you can select these two or more if needed. So in the current case, I'm going to select this as condition and commit. So once I do a commit, the again process restarts. It says that this particular thing has a false positive of 11.71, but then it gives me another sort of rule, which is a counter based real time creation of a condition which says a specific parameter for the amount, right? And then it has kind of, if you see, the rules have been brought down, the false positive has been brought down from 11.71 to 1.18. So what we will do is, we can also commit this condition as well. And the process goes on. I mean, I can keep on doing this, but then I also have an option where I could do this automatically. So in this particular case, I can just go on, create the rules based on these conditions, or use an automatic rule generation that happens, right? So as you can see on the bottom, you have the full list of condition. Now here the good thing is, for a fraud investigator, he can actually read those rules. Despite this is being created by an AI, he says that if the country code is this, and if the last 24 hours payment is in this particular bucket. And again, this is a very simple rule just for a demo I've created. There are very, very complex rules that could have a number of conditions, because we are talking about not just using the financial, but also a lot of profile data as well. Some of the example here is in one of our customer cases, they found that they actually captured the ISP related data as well, and they suddenly saw that they never had this particular ISP being used, and this particular account actually started having huge number of frequent transaction. So that kind of created a suspicion, and then they referred that as a identified that as a potential fraud case. So they blocked the transaction and investigated. They found that this was a genuine case of fraud. So really speaking, this can be any number of complex rule, but the good thing is you can create this as a manual rule, as well as you can create your own rule as well. So uh, that's the key around that. Now, if we look at the rule that we had just created, so you have the categories of rule. As you can see, different categories of rule. So that's a rule set, as we call it. And if we try and find the rule that we have created, yeah, it's there down below, rule 01. Yeah. So this is a rule that we have created. Now it is there for us to, for further add more conditions. Now the way the thing works is either this can be, tagged as the, yes, no, authorize, decline, or you could also assign a score. And once the threshold reaches a particular score based on multiple rules, then it is potentially a fraud transaction or not. So you can really create simple, medium complex, or most complex, any kind of rules that you can create, at the same time giving a full visibility as to how these things happen, right? Let's see some of the other rules. For example, we have some country rule. Yeah, here you have this Spain rule. Now, if you look at this, what it says is, now this is based on the card data. So you have certain types of country code. It's identified certain categories of, merchant, and a POS entry mode, and typically the kind of amount that is going into these kind of typical transactions, right? So there is no limit to what complexity you can build in. We've seen even people using it to complement their AML solution, mule detection, circular money flowing. uh, Potentially the beneficiary and the transferor, you could actually look at, going back into the history, if this beneficiary was actually also doing the transfer of amount to multiple accounts. So that's kind of acting as a mule, etc. Right. So this was a sort of glimpse I wanted to show in terms of the product. And once typically you've taken that data, production data, simulated, created your rules, you can actually click on this button and do a go live. While you do a go live, your existing production is not disturbed. It's only at appropriate time that the champion, the challenger model becomes champion, and the process goes on. So it really is up to you. How do you leverage these capabilities, and how frequently you use it for your investigation, or making changes to the data. So a lot of times we see that these kind of huge project, if you have to add a few more things, it's always a bit of challenge, especially touching the production data, because these are all mission critical system. But with the robust cluster based architecture, where you will have all the different nodes acting in consistency with each other, there is no loss of data even when you select the champion model to go live and make it a production model. Right. So this was a brief that I wanted to show about the product demo. Yeah.
We'll take the questions now.
Correct. So I think I am looking at the questions. The first question is from Romil, who's asking, this is about transaction for payment. What about the other type of detection, where you have MSME and other sort of scenario, lending and stuff like that? So the answer is, the key value proposition here is where you need to detect these fraudulent transaction in real time, in milliseconds. Yes, If you have some of the other offline transactions where you want to identify, fraudulent pattern and detect that, this can definitely do that, but then this is meant as a, real-time fraud protection system. So in cases where you have those fraudulent documents and LCs being utilized in a way to commit fraud, or the employees involved in the fraud, where it may not be a real-time detection scenario, the answer is the solution can be used. It's really up to you how do you want to use it, because primarily it is for the real time on detection in a sub milliseconds kind of scenario. We cannot talk about a lot of customer references, but we have a lot of global companies who are using this solution for many years. In fact, some of the companies who in countries where the online mobile based payments etc started, they went with this solution because the requirement to detect the fraud in really milliseconds was the key, and it kind of proved that very successfully. So Zubin, we would be more than happy to have one-on-one discussion on that. But we have banks, we have switch operator, we have central some of those different financial institutions who are using this as well. In fact, we also have some of the startups as well, who are using it for the payment fraud detection. Prem is asking about rapid movement of funds. Yes, this is one of the scenario that they used, in one of the customer with us to do these kind of detections as well. As you can see, the whole key here is when it talks about rapid movement of funds, the ability to detect these sort of scenarios in very less amount of time, and that is I think the power of the solution that we provide, to really make that happen. So you may probably take that data and have a business model which may actually detect that. So the logic is there, but can the logic be applied in a business scenario? So that's what we have proven over a period of time. Pradeep, you want to add some of your thoughts?
Yeah, so it was very interesting to see that initially when we had the first poll question, almost half of the attendees had a feeling that they do not have a real-time detection solution today, and that's the beauty about what our IBM team has put together, is that we are able to process transactions, almost everything in a real-time basis, because of the architecture that we have, the modernized deployment that we have, and the type of people who are designing these algorithms. That's one thing which it will be good to share with the team here, who are using some of the competitive solutions today. And the good news about that is that we can coexist with any of the existing players, because what we offer is much more than some of the other solutions which have been traditionally been there and have an approach of a black box. Whereas compared to that, the IBM solution is pretty open and allows a lot of artificial intelligence capabilities. And there are questions around blockchain, whether we'll be able to extend this platform for such areas. So there's no limitation as such, where you want to probably go ahead and do financial crimes detection. And we have several capabilities which address both the real-time world of challenges and the non-real-time world of challenges. Non-real-time world of challenges will be data oriented, and which will have a lot of entity research, entity resolution, to find out how there is a collusion of people who are syndicating fraudulent transactions. Could be financial, non-financial, it all can be seen in a single interface to help clients take care of the financial crimes which they are facing. So the answer is yes. And some of our customers are very large national payments, which, and some of the banks have even given testimonials which are available on Google. If you just do an IBM Safer Payments and a video search, you would see some of our customers based in Australia, New Zealand, Germany. They speaking about how they've been benefiting from this modern solution. And that's one of our biggest differentiator compared to some of the other solutions which are available. All those solutions today are not able to probably address the current dynamics of frauds that we are seeing. And that is where IBM plays a very unique position. And we have some very good experts who are based out of India, US, Germany, and some of the parts of Europe who put together their intelligence into this solution. And that's how that passes on to every customer who is today adopting this solution in a big way. And in fact, one of the solutions that we recently know that we did more than 16 replacements of one of the other competitor across all geographies in the world. And that is because the algorithms which we offer, the approach that we offer is very unique and helps every organization to deal with fraudsters in a much better way.
I think we have some more questions. I'll take the question, sir.
Yeah.
Can the tool integrate with our payment system or core banking system for the real-time fraud detection?
Yeah, so I think I briefly covered that in the presentation. We worked across different clients and different geographies who are using a plethora of core banking solution and payment solution. So we have all the tools and capabilities to integrate with those applications, because at the end of the day, this is not a system that works in silo. We need those message feeds, and we need to share the intercept with the respective team to make it really happen. And we've proven that across those clients in all of our implementation. We've kind of proved that successfully.
We'll take the last question for the day. Would it be possible to use our custom Python model in addition to safer payments AI engine?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. In fact, I saw in the poll as well, some of you are actually using some solution which is built on top of open source technologies. And as a strategy to join this data science revolution, making the best of both worlds, that's what we do. I mean, we have our own, easy to use, at the same time, robust calculation rules creation engine, which we can combine with your models, because they might be specifically focusing on some scenarios which comes from the fraud investigation teams mind, the minds who actually are expert in identifying that from a human perspective. So why not to combine the both? We can use those models as well, create a combined score, and take the rules detection to the next level. So we are quite open on that as well. So we built, in fact, that as a capability in the solution itself, where we can adopt to those models as well.
I think that's all the time we have for the questions today. Any final comments, gentlemen?
Thanks everyone for giving your time. It was a pleasure to be here, and I'm sure it was worth your time to understand some of the new things that we're doing.
Thank you.
All right. As mentioned earlier, a feedback form will open in your browser after the webinar ends. Please fill in the form. We sincerely appreciate your valuable feedback. With this, we come to the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much, Mr. Pradeep and Mr. Atul, for sharing your insights. Thank you, audience, for sparing your valuable time for the webinar today. In case if you like to get in touch with the webinar team, the details are on screen. Take care and stay safe.